Thank you, everybody, Sylvia, for the invitation and for being here today with us. What we thought we would show you today are 3 projects that we've worked on over the past few years. And in all those 3 projects, and that's the reason why we've called in the presentation Design Through Research, because all the 3 projects that we're going to present today, we have collaborated with curators and the other people of the team for each project from the very beginning, being involved in the concept and the direction of the projects. And in all 3 projects, we didn't really apply a specific standardized methodology, but we actually built the path through projects, through the needs of the projects. And so at the very beginning, we didn't really know the end result, visual graphic results, but also the actual method we would have applied for the whole process. The first project that I would like to introduce is basically an exhibition on which we worked on from August to October last year for the Guggenheim in New York. And it's called Ozone Futures Market. And basically, what we did by the end of the project is an online platform, and the first entirely online project done by the Guggenheim, and an interactive exhibition that lasted 3 months in Manhattan. I'm going to try to introduce this project as I present the project and the various slides of the platform. And it started in a bit of a cloudy way because we were called in by the architect of the Guggenheim that had just been nominated curator a few months before we worked on this project, and he asked us to collaborate with him for the direction of his first exhibition. But strangely enough, it wasn't going to be a traditional architecture exhibition per se, but it wanted to explore what can be emerging technologies and the different effects that emerging technologies have on humankind, on people's lives. And we wanted to understand how architecture as a discipline can actually take care or deal in a speculative way and in a critical way of the transformation of space in general. So not only the built space, but our approach compared to urbanization and to people. And so the idea of this platform was to build an interactive online environment as a market. That's why it's called Ozone Futures Market. So a market in which futures are exchanged, but these futures didn't have to be real futures or stock options, but they had to be future scenarios in which people would have invested depending on their opinions and what they would have read on the news. And so it's sort of simulation of the market, financial market, but the output wouldn't have been a gain or virtual money, but they would have gained credibility on a future that they had imagined. So this was the first image, first slide that then we started putting together for the project. And the sentence summarizes what is the incipit, the beginning of the whole project. What I told you in a few words was actually the brief we received, so it was absolutely non-defined. And as a designer, the team with which we worked was quite a small team because it was about 6 of us as a studio that was asked to do the design, the curator himself, and an expert of artificial intelligence that had to take care of managing this whole thing, real, making it a reality, and then 2 front-end developers for the project of the front end of the website. So the first things that we did, the first month and a half, was to design not so much the website itself, but the various procedure and the interaction that the users would have on the platform. And so the various things that the people would have had to do, we did it imagining what the people would have had to do on the website, how they interacted, and what they could have done on this website, and transformed the various passages with the wireframes and layouts. And then we started to explore and what is here is to be able to manage to merge two different worlds. One was more the traditional world, which was very strong from a visual point of view of the exchange market, of the financial market. So a series of visual environments that we're all quite used to seeing, especially starting from the last few years when the economy has actually become the main engine that we see on all kinds of media. So we tried to quote, but also detach ourselves because we didn't want it to be tied to the market and stock options and so forth. But on the other hand, we had to work on this concept of the future. So we had to give shape to something that wasn't really defined, that would have defined itself as we went on and the users used the platform. So these were some of the things we did, some of the hypotheses we worked on as the symbol for the currency, virtual currency that we would have used on our platform, that we obviously called coin, and it was the symbol of an A with a circle around it. And then other things in which we worked in detail to develop how to represent the financial for the portfolios of the investors. So we worked on how to perceive the main colors we would have worked with as being dominant on the website. So we chose this blue and green. And as you can see, the gradients change and it's quite uniform, and we tried to simulate the various scenarios and how the different ranges of the values of the different portfolio owners, and this is what came out as a chromatic color range. And then we started working on how the various elements in the market, apart from the shares, there could have been investment funds, indexes, and then I'll explain later concretely what I mean by that, but could have been visualized with geometric shapes. So the idea was to give to be able to make with different geometric shapes the different parts of the market. After all this work we did, which actually took 3.5 months to 4 months to achieve it, in which the design changed at least 20 times throughout those 4 months, because we weren't really ever been able to get to a point where the project was in the workshop, it was working and defined, but it was always until the end, because the designer was really used as a tester to see how the procedures and the prototype of the website itself was working out. A series of slides that show you the possible way that the user had to log into our website. The difficult thing to achieve in this project was to be able to make who was going to log on to our website, but as it is, as you guys that are listening to me for the first time, was really make them understand what it was all about. So we had to create a procedure, a login procedure, in which the users were asked questions, opinions actually, of yes and no questions, if you're against or for certain things. Applications of different technologies, of contemporary, and their consequences such applications have. And since whether people answered positively or negatively to these basic questions, then the system created a portfolio of shares for the user. And so the portfolio was made up of these futures that created the portfolio for the user. This is the final page of the website once you've logged in, when you have your profile. And what you would see after that is this first visualization of the market. So these balls that you see there, those spheres, represent the economic value of the futures, and all the futures that you can see on the titles on the slide. For example, smart contract family, extra state citizenship, mind uploading. All the hypotheses of true scenarios that could probably take place or are likely to take place in the near future. So each one of these futures was created by the curators and a team of contributors, and it was what the people wanted to invest in. So based on how much the people bought shares of futures, their portfolio would grow, would form or model differently and influence on the value of the single futures within the market. This is the page of the futures with an overview of the overall market, and then each future corresponded to a value of buy and selling, and which is described in the contents of the future. Then you have the page of the single future that is treated exactly like a share on the market, on the stock market, would be treated. And the first thing that you can see here is this element right here that I'm circling, which is a headline of a breaking news, and it's another idea for this project, which was that the people should have intervened within the market, not in a totally casual way, but by justifying their own transactions based on the news they had read on, that they found interesting or not. So the people were asked to justify how they behaved on the market, connecting each transaction to a breaking news that they had just come aware of. This is a page where the futures are described. Each future was created by a curator, a writer, or somebody who was asked to create the specific contents for our website. This is the visualization of the futures and the investment funds as they are in real life, a whole group of actions that have to do with different sectors of investment. In the A-zone future market, it was a group of futures together. In this case, it was post-capitalist fund or decentralized networks. And in this case, there's a small explanation and then a list of the possible funds. And here again, once again, the specific fund within the ecosystem of futures that make it up is represented and shown and is included. And you can see the news that corresponds to the specific funds. And then the last layer, so the indexes. What I mean by indexes, it's actually a macro level presentation of the market that we've decided to represent with this heat map. So a sort of visualization of the distribution of the different values given. In which the specific individual futures are divided with different qualities. So you have right, wrong, free, or sure. And then the specific values are given by the color, which is represented with the different gradients of colors and hues that shows distribution and value. The idea was the one that being a togetherness of different levels of interaction and quite complex levels of interaction, and above all, we couldn't expect that each user would get to the same level of engagement of the game as anybody else, because you could have had the program user that was very interested and the one that was interested in a more superficial way. And it was more plausible that they would just simply look at the slides and screens and then got bored and decided they didn't want to interact anymore. But we did want that from the very beginning, that even the less interested user could understand what we were talking about. And so what we did was the homepage, as you can see here, which we launched the website on, in which we've decided to use the same visualization of the various indexes, but we used the market data in real time. And so what you see here is actually of the people playing on the website. But the thing is that when you logged on the first time, you would see the future seems 74% more sure than yesterday. And this sentence represents and formulates numbers that correspond to the data of the search engine of the game that is elaborating such information. And so the cloud keeps changing as the game moves on and users interact. And then underneath you have other blocks of contents. You see how the futures work and how they are evolving. You can see breaking news based on the futures that are liked most by the users. Here, what we're showing is the procedure, the investment procedure, in which here, once again, it was very difficult to be able to think about how to oblige the user to create an action by selecting the news that they were interested in and mixing these two facts together. So this attitude of play and game within market and investment, and so using news and collecting it and connecting them to their own game. So the system proposed a series of news with which you might be interested in, then you connect them directly to the transactions you wanted to make. These are the portfolios, and each user had a personal investment page in which they could see the information about their investments, the value, the cash, the future values, and then a ranking of that compares the various performances of the investors. There's a notification system. Whenever you log in, you get a push or notification depending on how your futures are going on the market, or suggestions with artificial intelligence. The algorithm could calculate for you and suggest in terms of investment. For example, this future is doing pretty bad today, so you're better off selling it. This is another page, and this is the ranking for the futures. These are a few images of the space once the exhibition was ready and finalized. It was only a curved wall that we decided to use, and we decided to use projections only. And so these are all the projections that you saw on the website are isolated and projected against a curved wall, in which you have the various indexes and how each future was going in loops, so they kept on being reproduced on the walls and so forth. At the end, the only interactive part of the exhibition was this monitor, in which the people could simply activate by pushing a button, and the visitors could print like a receipt, and it was basically the catalog of the exhibition, in which they printed out the definitions of the last 5 futures that had been exchanged on the market. So every time the catalog actually changed, depending on how the futures went. This project that is still online today, and it can be seen, it's called azone.guggenheim.org, and it was done completely in open source, and so each part of the website is on a tab. And what is very interesting is that after we launched it on the market, after one line, the market was invaded by bots. And so what was really interesting was how some futures was manipulated by the bots that were sent online, that were able to create thousands of transactions per minute, differently from the people who were actually playing online and weren't able to understand what was going on. I'm going to go on with the second project that we've decided to show you today. And the second project is a project that we did for the Biennale Interieur in Kortrijk for 2014. Kortrijk is a small village in Belgium, and it hosts this Biennale since 1967, I think. And it's a Biennale on design that had curators, very important curators such as Mendini, Girodorfles, to Gertschich. It's not very well known, but it is a very important Biennale for when it comes to product design, especially, and interior design. In 2014, the curator of the cultural aspect of the Biennale was Joseph Grima, and he invited us to be part of this project that articulated in 3 different moments, main moments. And when we intervened, So we intervened in these three ways, which were, the first one was an editorial intervention, and so we published, and that summarizes all the contents that were developed and elaborated throughout the cultural program. And the second part was a workshop that we did within a school, an abandoned school. It was a high school of the country. And the third intervention took place within the expo, in which they decided to host projects that were part of the Biennale. So the whole program for the Biennale actually took place within Expo, and so in this specific pavilion, that was a huge pavilion in an area of the city, but also within the city itself. And so through different programs that involved different figures, the whole city of Courtrai was involved in the Biennale. The first project, let's say the first part of the project, is this book that we published, which is called The Quantified Home. It's a very particular project because both for its nature, in terms of aesthetics, and when you first glimpse at it, and very particular because of the variety of covers it presents, that I will speak to you in a second moment, but also because of the type of contents that the book contains, because the entire program reasons around how living has changed. How has the concept of living changed over the past 50 years? So how has your home, the house, and the contemporary living, how has it changed after the various economic or political events that took place and cultural events that took place, and how you can actually describe this change through a book that is divided in 3 sections, and within each sections there's several essays that were asked to be written out by different authors, and each one of these authors describes a particular life expectation of living. The first parts of the book open up, the first 2 sections illustrate and host essays that speak about architectural projects, different architectural projects. And so the essays start off with the drawings of these architectural essays that the authors write about. And so we wanted to tell you today how we actually decided to build these drawings, starting from the modeling of the various projects, and through the collaboration, of course, of another studio that we involved in our project in building and creating these drawings. And we started off really from zero. And so depending on the material we had available, and very often was zero and almost nothing, sometimes a few layouts or prospects or just existing drawings. This is, for example, the Big Brother house, because one of the essays spoke about this scenario, the end of the world scenario, which is the Big Brother house, and so where so we built it from zero. This is the drawing of the house and the interiors of the house. To talk about the project, to illustrate it and explain it, and hence highlight the beginning of a new essay. This is another project. This happened in situations at a distance. So obviously we use technology such as Skype, and we had collaborations through screenshots and through video conf calls and so forth. We were able nonetheless to communicate with another studio, and it's not something that has to be underestimated, because very often distance does make things a lot more complex and the work. After the opening with the drawings that I've just showed you, the next essay for the various layouts of the essays, and the way we decided to put them on paper was to use the images, so small images, almost as if they were just visual drawings to the text in itself, given the nature of the images that we had available, and so very heterogeneous and in low resolutions, and it was a choice that we made and wantingly made, because we didn't have iconographic material that was good enough to do it otherwise, but also because we wanted to talk about and illustrate and give importance to the text in itself, and to talk about things in different ways. For example, with graphs and charts, the importance of other information present. For example, these on how the markets went, because part of the book obviously puts attention and stresses the importance and the influence that the economic changes have on living, contemporary living. And so, for example, if you look at this, it tells you how prices of houses have grown over the years, and how you can notice that mainly after 2008, which was the catastrophe that took place, economic crisis that took place worldwide, the prices have soared, making it almost impossible to buy a house. Or this other, differently from what you could imagine by looking at this, what it shows is that the first country, it shows the percentage of people that are owners of a house in which they live. And hence, this shows, for example, that Switzerland, followed, I think, by Germany and Austria, even though they are the wealthiest countries in the world, are the ones that have the least ownerships of houses and real estate. And so the majority of the people lives in rented houses. Or this other one here, this graph that shows the quantity of time and the quantity of hours spent for house cleaning and house chores, different types of house chores like gardening or looking or cleaning the house or the laundry. And try to guess which. It's divided amongst men and women, and so the women are the darker bars and the men are the lighter bars. Try to guess or see, because I've already told you, but you can see that women are definitely the ones that spend more time in house chores, or the highest number of hours doing house chores in the different countries all over the world. This is another chart that shows how many square meters you can buy with $50,000. And so it shows that Monaco is the most expensive city because you can buy only less than a square meter, 0.9 square meters with $50,000, whereas if you go to Dar es Salaam, it's the cheapest because you can buy it corresponds to the biggest square, which obviously is a higher number of square meters. Milan is not present in this chart. There is Rome, which is the 13th in the ranking. The book then articulates and unfolds through other types of contents which were thought out to have a general overview and different shades on living in itself. And so we asked for miniature stories, flash fiction stories to different writers and authors. For example, this one was written and we divided it also with the way we paged it. As you can see, it's very different from the essays I showed you before. Another essay took place with a timeline on the different and the most important moments that had to do with living in itself. And the book finishes off and ends with a photographic essay of pictures that were specifically selected by Instagram or by internet. Based on the hashtags that had to do with the living in itself. And so the most numerous hashtags on living and the way people lived were chosen as pictures on how the people, common people, talk about living. These are a few images when we went into print. It took place in Belgium. And to tell you about the covers of the various books that I told you I was going to go into later on, they were printed using wallpaper. We selected around 20 different types of wallpaper to do the book covers, and we then silk screen printed all of the titles. And so obviously the covers are covered literally by wallpaper. To do this, I'll also tell you what was fun about it, but at the same time interesting to talk about, because each time you choose something that is unconventional or that people are not used to, you definitely face and are bound to face variables and factors that are unforeseeable and definitely unforeseeable. Hence, some of the wallpaper that we had chosen in the end were too old, and hence they weren't to be able to stay on the covers when we silk screen printed because they burned. And so we had to choose other two stores, like right before we went into print, to find or to try to find a wallpaper that would work for our project, or even the dimensions in themselves foresaw that the paper be hand cut. And so a very difficult job that might have seemed easy turned out to be very long and time-consuming, and that really did imply a very strict organization behind. And even for once the covers and the books and the different volumes were ready, even the fact of putting them separately in boxes was done by hand, because they had to be sent with several different covers, and obviously each cover was not the same, so they all had to be assembled by hand. The second part of the program was the workshop that I told you about before, that took place within an abandoned high school, and that saw the participation of different people amongst architects and designers that got involved through a call, and that together modified both the structure of the building and the interiors of the building. And so, for example, we used recycled material that was recycled from the school itself. They created the staircase that opened up a new entrance to the building. And through this path that was the intervention of this workshop that took place in the fair are both repropositions of contents, of the same contents of the book in a sequential way within a physical space. So once again, we're speaking about living and how you can transform a school that had an original usage thought out, but that is differently explained and illustrated here. And we explain how we modified the interior, so we had to imagine a totally different type of interior, and at the same time explain about facts and evolutions of living in a house through quotations. For example, this very interesting quotation by this woman architect. She's an Austrian woman architect that created the Frankfurt kitchen, which is the first, let's say, economical cheap kitchen. That says that it seemed that a woman architect would know best what was important for kitchens. It's a bit funny because she designed it in the 30s, and so this obviously was earlier because a woman knows how to draw a kitchen, but in the 30s she never cooked. So, or other quotations and other texts that allow you to live the interesting moments of change that took place in our century in the living experience. The various quotations that you've seen were silk screen printed on the wall. This was the cutting of the single specific letters, and then we stenciled them, applied onto the walls. Inside the building, we also intervened on the structure itself through, for example, these openings. And these are a few examples. This specifically is what an artist did who worked with us in this workshop, and she used to dig holes. A tunnel in this case, but holes in other interventions. The building was then interpreted and used also to interpret, once again, the economic data acquired through the website and the platform. So the building in itself became our web page. And so by using the characteristics and exploiting the various characteristics, we painted it in such a way that it could tell some and talk about some of the economic data. This is the explosion of Airbnb, for example, after 2008. And it finishes off in the gym of the school, in which we foresaw a play, a show done by Roombas. Roombas are machines that clean the floors autonomously. So you turn them on and they go around alone. And the Roombas, in this specific case, were dancing a valser together. The third part of the job, in which our contribution was a minor contribution, because the structure was designed by Space Caviar, which was a collective together with Grima, looked after the whole section. Our contribution was to reinterpret once again the economic data we had through the realization of certain graphs that we made material, we turned into tangible charts through the use of neons and or with these light boxes in which we can see once again how many square meters you can buy with $50,000 in the various cities around the world, making them tangible and physical objects. And trying to illuminate the space with this with the data. As you can see, the blue was the strongest for the women's quantity of hours spent in house chores, and the white was less, so through the use of color. And so, as Marco was saying, the contents were interpreted in different ways depending on the place where they were placed and exhibited. And so, for example, this is the photo essay as was in the book that I told you about. And this is the structure inside Expo. The last project that we would like to show you this evening, I'm going to try to be short. It's a project that we started 2 years ago, and it is still ongoing. It's called Italian Limes, and it started when we were invited by the curators for the Biennale 2014, the one before, and we had to present something for an exhibition called World Italy, Mondo Italia, and it had to be a geographic section of our country, of Italy specifically, through the presentation of 40 projects. Each one of these 40 projects would have had to concentrate on a specific place and theme. And so when we were asked to propose and to give an idea for this exhibition, we decided to concentrate not so much on a geographical location, place, city in Italy, but more of a geography in terms of territorial land, and somehow the boundaries of a country can be interesting for our disciplines, because a boundary is something that extremely important to define the shape of territory, because it gives you the silhouette and the form and the aesthetic visual of it, especially think about a map, but it doesn't exist. This is something that is very physical and that has an impact on people, but that physically only exists on maps, because it looks like a line, but in reality it's very difficult to see, especially in Europe, because obviously the Italian boundaries, like the majority of the European boundaries after the Schengen Treaty, have disappeared, as you very well know and experimented, especially if you've traveled in Europe. We went from a place like this, where the boundaries had checkpoints and security points. It's now marked by architectural elements that are quite obvious and understandable and characterizing, to this, where we don't have boundaries anymore. We can move around Europe without any more boundaries, in a totally free way, without almost noticing that we're going from one state to another. But nonetheless, and even though, and we have this mobility that we have gained, we also know that these boundaries are something that are more important than what they were in the past, especially in the 2-3 years. We've been speaking about boundaries a lot more thanks to the news, and our proposal was to try to describe, in 2014, when we first hypothesized this project, what was a boundary. So what was the Italian boundary? How could we describe the Italian boundary in terms of an exhibition and art? And so the first thing we did was go to the various archives of IGM, which is the geographical military institution present. It's the official organ in Italy that produces all of the maps and cartographies, just as it happens everywhere else in the world. There is an agency, there's an institution that is in charge of producing maps for each country. And so we started to understand through these archives how the boundaries are created, and so the process on field, and then document how the geography from the 1800s, from when Italy became an independent state, is measured and defined. The various technologies employed, analogical technologies to the more digital technologies. This is the first, GPS owned by GPM in the 90s, and through a very long job that lasted decades, the Italian territory was actually measured physically. And so they created maps that we are used to seeing now in Google Maps, for example, but obviously cartography and maps foresee this type of work, which is really measuring square by square all of the territory with the different tools available. And then, depending on the conformation of the Italian territory, this operation is obviously very difficult in certain parts, especially in parts of the boundaries, such as this, where you have points on the boundary that are measured through a GPS, highly precise GPS detectors that can reach 8 millimeters precise detection. And then we started taking out all of the maps and all of the maps with which the boundaries are represented, not so much in terms of communication, but the way the Italian government actually archives the geographical information from a visual point of view. And this, for example, is a part of the Italian boundary, and the boundary materializes as a line with the different points that represent the points that we've seen before of the detectors. Through our research, we realized a strange shape that made us understand how to develop our project. This image of a banal Google map shot, you can see that yellow line that goes a line coincides with a arrow, a line that divides the two states. What do I mean by this? That all of the water that falls on the right of the yellow line go into the Po River, and all the water that falls on the left hand goes into the Danube. And as you can see, a lot of the times this line falls on a glacier, and because of the global warming, the glaciers melt, and so the boundaries keep changing, and in some cases they've disappeared. And this has led to the fact that in 2008, the Italian government launched a new law that said that the Italian boundary is mobile and not possible to define. And it says that every 2 years, the Italian government has to remap and remeasure the boundary depending on how the glaciers melt and move. These are images that show you this phenomenon. It's always images taken from the IGM archive. You can see how the disappearance of the glacier has to coincide with the highest point that corresponds to the mountain range. And this is images that we've taken from the archives, and you can see how they're measuring, IGM is measuring the melting glaciers. And when we found this strange phenomenon that we thought was superficial and very strange, it actually helped us, and it triggered a switch, because it became the way and that specific anecdote or thing that allowed us to express this paradox that created, thanks to sophisticated GPS detectors that really do allow us to map and transfer from the territory to a map in almost real time and with extreme precision, a phenomenon that keeps changing. And it obliges somebody to go there and measure this phenomenon continuously. And so what we've wanted to do was to tell you and produce this story in an exhibition, and we did it in an interactive way in the Biennale. And how did we do this? We decided to select a part or a portion of the boundary in which the phenomenon takes place continuously and mostly. This is the part that we've decided to use, and you can see that the boundaries change, and you can see the two lines show how the boundaries have changed. And we've decided to measure it, but from a remote way throughout the Biennale for the 6 months. And so the visitors in the Biennale could see the boundary changing in real time for the 6 months of the Biennale. And we built a series of detectors, and this is the making of our detectors, and we built some sensors that we put inside these wrappings or envelopes to protect them for those 6 months, to protect them at a 4,000 meter altitude where we installed them for the 6 months of the exhibition. We marked them with the information of our project, and we then went to install them in the specific points that I showed you before. So on each one of these glaciers on the boundary between Austria and Italy, we had to use a helicopter a month before the exhibition. This is our photographer that is getting ready to the extreme temperatures on the glacier, and we landed on the glacier. And we walked along the glacier, installed the sensors, 5 sensors that you can see right here. That little black thing is a solar panel, and so they were programmed to work for 6 months autonomously and to upload their geographical coordinates every hour, and the only thing they did is every hour tell us where they were. And so when we went down, we started receiving the data from the sensors, and it wasn't anything but longitude and latitude on each one of those sensors. Once we installed the on-site part of our exhibition, we then designed the actual installation exhibition that we were going to put in the Triennale, and we decided to use a robot, like a drawing machine. These are images of the first prototype that we thought about creating using open source technologies. And this allowed us to receive the data and then design the boundary lines based on the information received from the sensors. We chose it as a formal quotation of the first machines that were used by IGM to draw the first maps of the Alps at the beginning. So even from the design of the installation and the exhibition, we did try to go back and rerun the history of what we were talking about. Apart from the drawing machine, we then decided to collect information about another type of archive produced by the government, which are 3D images of the territory. Which are these? They are files that have very high resolutions and that reconstruct the territory of all the state. It's a 3D scan of the territory. It's done through a plane that scans all of the territory by flying over it. And we used the same portion of the glacier, created a 3D model on a chalk model on which we wanted to give the 3D feeling of the landscape and the place. So not only the bidimensional aspect of the traditional mapping techniques, but give our visitors also a more spatial feeling of what a boundary it is, because obviously it's a natural present boundary and very strong boundary. Because they are very high mountains, it's a high mountain range, so we didn't want the installation exhibition to lose and not give the feeling of what those mountains look like. So this is what we did for the exhibition, in which we tried to create and put together all of the elements of the research. So the 3D model that we used as a production mapping to base and start in a dynamic way how the boundaries changed, a sort of evolution of the first maps in the 30s up until the high-resolution images taken from satellites. And then you had a showcase in glass which showed archive images and materials that we used, and then the drawing machine. How did the public and the visitors interact with our exhibition? There were a lot of maps that you can see is the same model but in a bidimensional format, but not the boundary line. The boundary line was designed from time to time when the visitor pressed the button and initiated the drawing machine, and then the drawing machine would draw the most recent boundary line detected from the sensors that were placed on the Alps. The machine is it worked with a red marker, which was the only colored element within the map. You can't really see it because there's not a strong contrast. This is the front and the back part of the map. You had the map on which the drawing machine printed, and then on the back you had a long description of the project. The long text that you see below is the transcription of in the Senate and the European Parliament on the aspect of a moving boundary, because we wanted that somehow this map on an official document for each visitor was actually witnessed that the government actually does archive all this information. This is a detail of how the drawing machine created a simple line with the position of the 5 sensors we had placed, and then the date and time of the boundary. Obviously, each map turned out to be a unique piece because it couldn't be repeated. This is a detail of the archives, images of the model projected, and so an animation over 3D model. Very difficult to show you because it's difficult to do it. There's a different frame rate and the machine, so. This is an image of the model, but it's actually the physical model on which we projected the map.